I think the first things first, if we just do a quick round of introductions for the benefit of anybody here that hasn't met us. So I'll kick off. So my name is Matt Haworth. I am the founder of a social enterprise called Reason Digital, which I founded when I was 20. My first business I founded when I was 15, but I'm definitely not a young LGBTQ entrepreneur anymore, sadly. But yeah, I'm now a trustee of a charity called AKT, which supports young LGBTQ plus homeless people or those at risk of homelessness. So yeah, James.
Thanks, Matt. So I'm James McMillan. I'm co-founder and CEO of a business called myNexus. We actually build digital tools that are designed to help entrepreneurs be more successful. I guess I'm an entrepreneur myself, but also I'm an accountant by background. I've had a career in corporate finance, all kinds of stuff. And I work across all kind of sectors of business and often take positions on boards as well to help with strategy advice and sort of making things happen, really. That's my background.
Hi, I'm Jodi. I'm a creative director and brand consultant. I run my own consultancy called Studio Zenko. We help good people doing good things make an impact across a variety of sectors. And I also work with various organisations supporting LGBTQ plus underrepresented and underprivileged young people in a mentoring capacity.
Hi everyone, I'm Lisa. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Chief Executive of the Proud Trust, which is an LGBTQ plus youth charity. So we are Manchester based, but work across Greater Manchester, Cheshire, West and Chester, but run a national digital helpline for young people, teachers and the people who they trust in their lives. So I think I'm here to give the youth work perspective because I've been a youth worker for about 26 years. So it's got to the stage now where the young people I've worked with are now coming to work in our organisation. So that's how old I am.
Thanks very much. Thanks for that. Yeah. So yeah, just a reminder for those of you that haven't seen the event kind of ad. We're here to talk about what life is like for young LGBTQ people. One of the most common things that Claire and I hear actually from the network is that people feel like they may be feeling a little bit out of touch with the experiences of or how to support young LGBTQ people. We are planning more events about this, including hearing from some young people next year. But we thought, what better way to start than to get a panel with a diverse range of experience to kind of kick off those discussions, really. So yeah, my first question, and you can kind of be as broad as or as detailed as you want with this, is what was it like for you to be a young LGBTQ person?
Oh, coming to me first. Okay. What was it like? I think in the world of work, I would say I haven't particularly struggled. I've worked for lots of kind of big corporates, people with LGBT networks. I've probably had a very typical, I guess, experience as someone that's 38. Sort of, I guess, came into a world of work when it was changing and it was relatively positive. That's not to say that it's been smooth. And I would say that in spite of those things, and certainly in my entrepreneurial career now, and in different jobs I've done, I've still come across that structural issue of kind of bias or how you're treated differently. And so I guess my angle, on my experiences, although, yeah, I'm an out white gay man, right? So that's like the easiest one of all of them. It's still been tricky to navigate, and I've had reflective experiences looking back where I've thought, actually, I've overlooked how I've been treated and I've written it off as something else, when the reality is that the support wasn't really there for me, even though it should have been. So I'm going to leave it at that, I think, for now, because I think we'll probably explore more. Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess my experience as a young person was a bit different because I only started my transition in my late 30s. So I kind of knew who I was from the age of 6, 7, 8 years old, but had no real education or avenues to sort of understand what that meant. So obviously growing up under Section 28, I've been very lucky. Family have always been amazing. Friends have always been very supportive, but I sort of never really felt I could talk about it. until I was kind of old enough to sort of start educating myself and what that means, and even then that still took a while. So to be honest, it's one of the reasons I like working with young people now, because hopefully they don't have to go through that same experience.
Yeah, I guess similar. So I grew up in a really deprived part of Lancashire. Similar place, yeah. That's why we've got dodgy accents. And I knew that I was attracted to girls when I was growing up, but there's no way on earth in Lancashire that I would have said that to anyone. But the difference in my life was youth workers. So firstly, youth club was a place that we went and we got fed, so that was important. But also, those youth workers showed me that you could be anything that you want to be. They gave me the aspiration to be something different and to move out from the place that I was and to challenge the stereotype a little bit. So I came out at 22 when I was a youth worker, but still difficult, because I think then, even in youth work, we were encouraged not to share that we were part of the LGBT plus community. We were encouraged to keep that quite hidden. And it's only probably in this job, it's the first time I've not had to come out as being married to a woman, as being a lesbian. And I'm 43, so I think that's quite sad in a way, because in all the other jobs I've found a way to sort of slip it into conversation with somebody that I felt was safe enough, but also the gossip that would tell everyone else, so I didn't have to come out all the time. And I think, you know, whilst it is better for young people now, we forget that it's not coming out once, and we continuously have to come out. And I think that's how I feel. And as a young person, the expectation was to be married to a man. And I think that's not changed massively in the part of Lancashire that you and I come from. So yeah, there's still a lot of work to do.
Very probably. Keep hold of the mic, we'll stick with you. I mean, we'll put James on the spot every single time. But yeah, I mean, that's quite surprising given that, you know, you come from back at Manchester City Council, and, you know, it's not like you've done a stint in sort of the oil industry or something. Like we're talking about what you would hope are fairly progressive spaces. I'd be interested to hear now about how, given your experience of kind of speaking to, working with, supporting, mentoring young people, young entrepreneurs, how do you think things have changed? How are things different now to those experiences that you might have had?
Oh, I'd hope to say massively, but for some of our young people, they're not. So we do get a lot of young people whose parents and carers are much more supportive than my parents and carers was as a young person. But actually, unfortunately, we still get loads of negative information from young people. So just last week, we've had a young person tell us, a trans young person, that they're being made to get change for PE in a store cupboard because the school staff don't want to accept who they are, so they won't allow them to change in where they should be changing. And we're in 2022, so that shouldn't be the case now. We're hearing that young people are still being abused with the use of the word gay, and the word gay is still being used as a negative across our education system. And we know from research that's been done that whilst homophobia is perhaps being challenged in schools and education settings, transphobia is not. I spend a lot of my time on these panels talking about why do LGBT plus young people not engage in sport and physical activity? And the reason is because they don't feel welcome. So that's why Helen's business is so important. Manchester Laces is so important. But what our trans and non-binary young people are seeing are trans and non-binary athletes being excluded from competitions, being excluded from participating, scores being wiped because the FA don't think it's a fair football game. So I think whilst things have changed in terms of the acceptance of peer groups in the main, we've still got a lot of work to do for our young people. You know, my goal is that the Proud Trust won't need to exist, but we're far from that place from our perspective.
Jodi, you do a lot of work, I mean, across the board really in mentoring, but particularly in the kind of arts and creative kind of space, which I guess we, you know, many of us, I know I do, associate it with perhaps being a bit more kind of progressive. What are the experiences of young people kind of entering into that sector or into careers in that space?
I think it's true that it is perceived as a more liberal sector. To a degree, that's true. I don't think it's quite as liberal as it likes to think it is a lot of the time. I think, especially as a sort of sector that PR is kind of its game, it's quite good at it. And there are some amazing companies out there, but there are also some of the sort of bigger agencies that are still very much the kind of boys' club. It's a very white middle class industry. It's sort of based a lot on who you know and who can get you into opportunities. There's a huge culture of unpaid internships, which obviously favours people from sort of middle and upper class backgrounds. It's really hard to do an unpaid internship if you've got to go home and pay the bills or contribute to a household. So yeah, I mean, one of the things the creative industries does allow you, though, is you can carve your own path if you've got the will and ability to do so. Again, that sometimes requires an amount of privilege to be able to take risks, to be able to sort of go out on your own rather than sort of rely on a paid salary. But what you do find sometimes is people kind of have to carve their own way rather than sort of trying to fit into a mould that they're not going to fit into. So yeah, there's opportunities there, but there's still, like Lisa said, some work to be done.
James, what's your experience been with kind of working with kind of younger entrepreneurs, I guess, in terms of how they're finding it, and sort of any sort of barriers that you sort of noticed amongst, particularly perhaps raising investment or those kind of things?
Yeah, so I mean, it's awful to say what Lisa said is music to my ears, but that's because as a disconnected elder gay, is that where I am now? I sort of live with that fear of, do I understand the youth enough? Am I connected into what their problems are? Is what I see in my world reflective? So it's sad that things aren't moving on, and I think unfortunately it's the same in other aspects of business. So I guess for instance, and even if you take away the LGBT issue, if you're raising investment for a business, it's no great secret that if you happen to be a non-white person, you get less than a penny in every pound of kind of financial institution investment that goes into business in the UK. If you're a woman, somewhere between 7 and 9 pence. We don't have the stats for LGBT because we don't collect it. It's not a visible thing. It's, some of those people will also be LGBT. My personal experience of fundraising is that it's been very difficult, to kind of, I guess to go back a bit to my journey, being in business and in a job probably only about 5 to 7 years ago, and having someone in a meeting say, you're just being dramatic, and you think, ooh, like, what do you mean by that? Because I was just raising what I thought was a business point, and now suddenly it's about my character. And that's the challenges that are facing entrepreneurs going for investment. It's the same issue of sort of unseen structural bias. And I think that's a big challenge, even for emerging leaders within organisations that have amazing employee networks and amazing, support for those individuals. How much work is happening with managers that aren't LGBT? Those are that's the other flip side of the coin, which is you can support the individual, you can give them access to a community, but what about the structural sides of the business and the way it operates in the same way as it is for recruitment, for dealing with women, for religious reasons, for pick your intersectional diversity here. I think that's sort of the challenge I think I've seen the other side of.
So that's interesting. I mean, I think that speaks to kind of a fear maybe I've heard in the network that actually, just because the leader of an organisation, some of the leaders in this room might be part of the LGBTQ plus community themselves, that doesn't necessarily automatically mean that their organisation is going to be supportive because of these systemic kind of biases and issues. Is that something you think there needs to be more awareness of?
Yeah, I think we're at a really interesting time in history, I suppose, and you can only judge things by what you see and feel and experience, okay? So I suppose the way I look at it, or the context I think we find ourselves in, is that in many ways, we live in a progressive country. Hold your applause. I mean, you know, at the moment, who can say? But the reality is that actually we are one of the most progressive countries in the world for LGBT rights. So arguably, you know, that looks shaky. And some stuff that's happening at the moment, particularly around trans, is definitely not good. But I guess that context is that perhaps we've felt a little bit like there's this tension between, but it's all right, isn't it? But then at the same time, you'll hear people say things like, yeah, but then you can stop going on about it now, can't you? Like, you've got equality, what more do you want? Like, it's almost, well, now we've got the right rights, we can put it back in the box. And it's almost like we haven't really got to a point of, you know, acceptance. There's tolerance, sure, you know, in many areas, but I wonder whether there's a difficulty in that actually as a community, our history is not that long. It only spans a few decades, really, if you think about the progress that we've made. And so I think sometimes, although we'd like it to be different, the reality is we're still quite early in that journey. And so I think there's a willingness to not dismiss it, but maybe go, it's fine, isn't it? Like, it's dead good, because we want that to be true. But actually, underneath it, if you really sat there and thought about it, like perhaps I've reflected on my career, I've gone, I'm not sure that actually happened in the best way. I think I just bashed through it because I was able to. But there'll be plenty of emerging LGBT people within the workforce who are 16, 17 now, who won't have that confidence, who won't have that necessarily that pathway. But I don't know, you know, what the answer to that is, I suppose. That's...
Yeah, and Jodi, I mean, that speaks maybe to some of those, you know, there's a lot going on in the media, particularly around trans rights at the moment. I know you mentor some young trans people. How is that kind of hitting, and how is that kind of what kind of impact do you think that's having in terms of young trans people's kind of thinking and kind of entry into the sector and into work?
I think overall it's quite exhausting. It takes up a lot of headspace that could be used on better things, to be honest. And like you say, things are actually, you know, it's easy to look at the negatives. We do live in a country where actually it does vary a lot by location and sort of background, but actually you can, to a degree, be comfortable who you want to be out in the world, but that does come with compromises, and it does come with caveats sometimes as well. So I think what I find working with young people a lot is this kind of palpable frustration, and that's not just across LGBTQ issues. You see it with things like climate change, with politics, in that basically young people aren't being given a say into the future they're going to inherit. And I don't worry about the next generation. They're the most clued up, amazing people, far more than we ever were. Well, speaking for myself, but you know, they almost know what they're doing, and actually kind of our role in a way is basically not to fuck it up to basically allow them the sort of pathways and opportunities to be able to thrive as LGBTQ people. And I think that's where you see a lot of the frustration, that they feel like they've kind of got all of the tools they need. They're just not necessarily being given the freedom or the opportunities to kind of fully reach that potential.
Yeah, thanks. And does that sort of line up with your experience, Lisa, in terms of, you know, how are the young people that you're supporting kind of experiencing what they're kind of consuming or hearing in the kind of wider political and media landscape? And do you think that's having an impact in terms of their kind of career potential, career opportunities?
Most definitely. I think we see a lot of young people not reaching their full potential because they are frustrated. You know, the media around particularly trans issues is really negative. So we spend a lot of time building the resilience of young people that we work with. We spend a lot of time saying it's not all bad, actually. You know, there are workplaces where you will be welcomed, you will feel like you belong, but we've got to get young people to a point where they're ready to look for a job. And actually, if your resilience is at rock bottom and you feel like the world hates you, there's a lot of work for us to do as youth workers to get them to the start point.
I suppose that's difficult because there's kind of a tricky balancing act there for you then, isn't there, between kind of really sort of preparing them for what they might face and expect, but also not sort of traumatising them about this potential hostility?
Yeah, I mean, young people are far more clued up on social media than I am, certainly. A lot of our youth workers are relatively young and would still be classed as young people, and I think that does help. We've got to protect our young people sometimes from all the negativity, and the fear surrounding particularly Tavistock, the changes to medical services and pathways is something that we end up talking to our young people about, which will then stop us talking to them about where do you want to be next? What do you want to do for a job? We have run employment programmes with our young people, but they ask us lots of questions about what if it all goes wrong, and we try to always put the positive spin on things, but we do have to prepare young people about what their rights are in education, in the workplace, and that's really important. I think sometimes Jodi's hit the nail here. We don't listen and hear young people. So we spend a lot of time saying to funders, to other organisations, this is what young people have told us and this is where they'd like to see it go next. And now we get co-production as a bit of a buzzword for some funders, but actually it's got to be true youth participation, true youth voice and true co-production. Not, this is what we as adults think you need, so we're going to pretend that we've produced it collectively with you. That takes a lot of confidence in adults to do that, to give up some of their power to young people. And it also takes a lot of confidence for the young people and a lot of trust, because they're so used to not being listened to throughout their lives that they come to us at a point where we have to get them used to that, where we have to get them used to being asked, what do you want to do? And we're really listening. So I think there's a long way to go with some of that work.
I think that kind of moves nicely on to my last question before we open up to the floor, which is, and maybe we go to you, Jodi, for this one. I'm just thinking, there's a lot of people in the room here that do lead departments or lead entire organisations, and they wouldn't be at an event like this or part of this network, I'm sure, if they didn't, have the best of intentions to try and kind of make positive change, particularly on this issue. What do you think is a kind of a tangible, practical kind of first step that the leaders here could kind of go away with to make life just a little bit better, perhaps within their organisations for young people, young LGBTQ plus people?
Well, Elisa said it's all about listening to them, but not just listening to them, but letting them know their voices are actually being heard. And there's a lot of very well-meaning people in companies across the land who think they're doing really nice things, but they haven't actually consulted and asked people what they really need. And that varies by individual as well. We always talk about LGBTQ people, queer people, the amount of intersectionalities within that. We all have very different needs. We know, for example, statistically, there's a lot more neurodiverse people within the LGBT community. So a lot of these things, there's a lot of kind of nice things that are kind of done in terms of employee benefits and perks, but actually, I think it's really helpful to drill down to an individual level with people and ask them what do they need to be able to thrive in your organisation. Whether that's employment, encouragement, whether that's training, sometimes that's space, sometimes that's time, sometimes it's sort of, being a bit more empathetic sometimes, or giving them a chance to sort of try things and fail sometimes as well. Ultimately just really listening to people, talking to young people and actually asking them what they really need rather than assuming.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to be part of a LGBT trade mission to the US, where just LGBT-run businesses were kind of sent out there, and we spoke to a lot of organisations about their D&I initiative, large companies, and one thing that came out of one company listening to young people was actually that they have a policy, a procedure that if somebody transitions, they have a list of all the things that they need to do at the company just to sort that out. And it's kind of surprising, I think, when you actually sit and listen, what some of the good ideas that come from young people that can really make a difference for them. James, do you have any thoughts on that, about a practical kind of step that we could take away as leaders from this?
Yeah, and to pick up, I guess that just connects with Lisa's point that she just made around kind of, at the youngest end, I suppose, that's not something that is different actually to people who are entering or leaving university now, or have been in work for 3-5 years. The kind of the upcoming generation, I guess, or the theme that I hear a lot and experience a lot is that the younger people are generally scared to get it wrong. They're completely afraid of getting stuff wrong, and so they live in this world of a different way of communicating. And even if you look at just as a generation, the style in which they communicate, the way they get information, it's already fundamentally different. And I like to say I'm a Zennial, because I wouldn't say I was millennial enough. I'm definitely Gen X analog. And
I got described as a geriatric millennial the other day.
I'll take geriatric millennial. I think that works. Yeah, okay, that's my new one. But I feel like there's an intersection there between actually what they're experiencing as a generation, and therefore, I guess I say people like me, but what I really mean is managers older than me, who are in business saying they just need to learn how to, get their social skills right. And actually the reality is they're probably never going to. That ship has sailed. That generation is already in the workforce and already communicates in a certain way. And eventually dinosaurs like me will be dead. And things will have moved on.
Merry
and
actually,
so for me, the tangible thing I think we can all do as leaders is yes, listen, and also listen in the context of how much are we putting on, like, how they should change or what they should do, and just think very carefully about, is that a reality? And so what are we doing to support them in the context of they just look, feel and communicate very differently to us, and maybe we've got to start adapting, and actually the smart businesses will have already started to do that.
So yeah, really kind of mindfully listen. I'm sure you would agree with that, Lisa. Is there anything else that you would really recommend for organisations beyond that?
I mean, the mindful listening, definitely the voice, but we don't become a fully functioning adult as soon as we turn 18. And I would ask managers just to remember that. Youth work is all about transitioning of young people into adult life, but we don't know everything we need to know. We're all sat here with the benefit of experience of having found our way, made some mistakes, reacted, changed the way we do things. And often what we see is young people going into the workplace and people expecting them to be the finished article, and they're not. Be the role model that you needed when you were a young person entering the workplace. It's exactly why I'm a youth worker. I wanted to be the difference, like the youth worker was a difference to me. So that would be my take.
Great. So yeah, giving that kind of space and permission, listening, and really kind of respecting the kind of way in which young people kind of present and communicate as a first step there. There's some really interesting themes as well that came up about the impact of the kind of media discourse, issues around healthcare, neurodiversity. Can we be an inclusive organisation for LGBTQ young people if we're not inclusive of neurodiversity as well? So some really interesting themes there. So yeah, just got a bit of time to open it up to questions from the audience. The
easy
most
ones.
Terrifying bit for any panel or panelist. So yeah, can we go just over here? If you just shout up, I'll repeat the question. It's hard to hear.
You touched on about the issues around transitioning at school for young people, and briefly around healthcare as well. And I was just thinking, as an organisation, do you have concerns about the latest interim specification and its reference to social transition and the impact that's going to have on young people?
So that question, just for the benefit of the camera more than anything. So good technical question. I'll try and do it justice. So any concerns about the interim specification that's been brought out, recommending or kind of emphasising, I suppose, the social model of transitioning?
I mean, it's a big question to ask me on a Pride in Leadership. I can hear my comms manager right now shouting in my ear, so I'll bear that in mind. We have concerns. We worked with young people when the interim guidance came out. We've spoke to some of our NHS colleagues and other LGBT plus leaders in the sector. For us, what it's lacking is the voice of the child and the young person. at no point have they thought to consult young people in this process and truly ask young people, A, what is their lived experience, those that have been through it, but B, what would they like to happen and how would it benefit them? So as a youth worker, that's always going to be my first concern. Secondly, the fact that now only GPs potentially are going to be able to refer, and we know for a lot of our young people that's not an option for them. Thirdly, when we talk about medication, we need to be really careful that we are providing young people with the right information and access to proper health care. And what the CAS interim report told us is that our LGBTQ plus young people are not getting the same standard of healthcare as their cis peers. And that's a problem. So, we've submitted an organisational response from the voice of the young person, and I think that's right, but most definitely. I mean, that could be a whole session in itself, the concerns around that. Hopefully they will take everybody's responses into consideration and we'll see a very different iteration come out, because actually regional healthcare pathways are a much better model than one place sat far down in the country. But we've got to get that right, and we've got to have all the stakeholders involved in the planning. And far too often, stakeholders are brought in at the end of that planning cycle and not at the start. So that would be my take.
So interesting in terms of that, how that follows on from what we just said about that point of sort of really trying to ask, actually listen, and kind of hold that space. That's what's not been done here, and that's created these concerns and these issues. So yeah, I think we had a question over here. Yeah, Dave, do you want to jump in?
I'd just be keen to hear your thoughts on what we can do to support more working class leaders, so that we have more of a representation of our society in leadership positions. And that's overlaid with LGBTQ identities as well. It's a big question. I'm interested to hear your thoughts.
So that question was, what can we do more to support working class people, particularly people into leadership roles, so we can kind of diversify in that sense as well? Anybody feel strongly about that one?
I can make a start.
Yeah, go for it.
So you're right. There's a real lack of working class leaders across the sector, maybe just across all sectors, not just the LGBTQ plus sector. We are working with a Manchester-based charity called Reclaim, and they focus on working class and projecting the working class voice, looking at how we bring the pride back into those working class leaders, working class young people. I'm really proud of my working class roots. I'm not ashamed of them. I'm not ashamed to tell my story of how hard it was. But interestingly, when you start a job as a CEO, and I'm sure other people, leaders in the room will agree with me, you get imposter syndrome. But, particularly people around you that have had maybe a better access to education, have gone to very good universities and not sort of wunged their way through life and use very different language to what I use. So, I joked earlier about our dodgy accents, but I've worked in Greater Manchester now for 15 years and my accent is not a broad Blackburn accent anymore, and I did that purposefully so that people would take me more seriously. Now that might have been my own perception of the situation, but it's still important, isn't it? So I think we need to be maybe true to our working class roots and talk about it a little bit more, and then we become role models in the system. Paid him to do that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. A lot of the mentoring stuff I do, I originally came into that actually from a social mobility perspective. I grew up in a working class background as well. And I've worked with, before the pandemic, I was working with schools in some of the most deprived areas of Manchester. And the reality is that these kids often grow up with a different set of expectations, which they shouldn't do. And a lot of the working with them from a mentoring perspective is actually to help them realise that they can break glass ceilings. Unfortunately, it is sometimes a bit harder. But that thing you said about pride, I think that's a really important aspect of it, and actually encouraging that pride in people, whatever background you're from. If you've got the will, you can go and do things. And I think too many people kind of assume something is not for them because of where they came from. And actually, sort of the first job I think all of us have here is actually to kind of drill into people that you can go and achieve these things if you've got the will to do it.
Yeah, I think so. I don't want to get too deep, but I was very fortunate to be on a panel a week ago with an unnamed economist from the Bank of England who was talking about what's going to sound unrelated, about the exodus of people aged 50 plus from the workforce and how the workforce is shrinking, and they're all a bit surprised by it, which I think is brilliant. Doesn't take a genius. I think as a country, and I think there's been a political obsession for a really long time with almost, I don't know, sending everyone to Eton, but not. You know, we don't want you to go to Eton, but we want you to have this education that we all bestow on you, which is great in many ways, but in others, it's totally driven that gap, I think, for working class leaders. I would like to think that things like the T levels coming in as a way to expand education into more than just grades and qualifications and tick boxes and going to do a degree, and this kind of pathway that we've been led on as that's where the gold is, as a way of opening that up and actually closing that gap a little. I think it's going to be very interesting to see over the next few years how employers actually embrace the T levels. You know, the whole point is that it's supposed to get people from those backgrounds into work and employment much earlier, and to help support actually the growth in our workforce and our economy and everything else. I hope it isn't going to turn into let's just get the working class people in to do the grunt work. You know, it needs to be more than that. So it really does have to be a part of a whole, I hate this word, but a holistic view of, you know, what education and business needs to look like together, because it doesn't work at the moment. It doesn't function.
Yeah, speaking of that broad Blackburn accent, I remember the first time I went to a meeting in London when I was about 19 and being accused of being too Yorkshire to be properly understood, which was just...
How rude.
Oh. And I was just shocked they didn't know what a ginnel was, so I didn't know that. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
So talking to you guys as leaders, as not a leader, if there's one person, so say me, just one person that wants to make a change somewhere, it can be really tough when nobody else is on that journey with you. What advice would you give to kind of... So I'm a children's nurse. I'm the only LGBTQ person on the ward. So it's hard because I want to make changes, but obviously I get blocked. And as well as that, I am obviously fine with looking after all LGBTQ plus children. However, I am looking after them every time. And they are heartbreaking patients to look after, and it will get onto your mental well-being. I'm so passionate about changing, but I really am struggling as one person.
So an invitation there to reflect on ways in which they make change within an organisation, particularly an organisation like the NHS, which is going to be one of the toughest cookies, right? So yeah, any tips?
So, because I'm holding the mic, I'll go first. And I was going to just pass it on because I thought, do I want to answer that? So, first part is you as the individual, don't underestimate the change that you make every day just by turning up to work. You really can't. And I think there is that whole thing about be the role model, be who you want to be. You'll attract the people around you, and you'll find yourself surrounded by people that look and think and feel like you. That, you know, your career will take the journey it's supposed to as well. In terms of making change happen, I'm going to sound like a proper name dropper now. I saw a talk many years ago that Harvey-Nebil was speaking at, the Prime Minister of Belgium, and he was talking about trying to pass legislation to do with kind of LGBT rights. And he said at the time that it was bundled up with this other issue over abortion, and they were really struggling to get it through. And he said all of it was the right stuff to do. And basically the advice he had was, drop the bit about abortion, you'll get the stuff through you want. Then focus on the next bit after. And what he was kind of saying was, you don't need to compromise on your morals or what you want to achieve. But I guess what he's kind of saying is, be realistic about what you can do. Incremental change is fine. It doesn't need to be step change. Every little kind of increment is getting us and all of us on that journey. So, you know, focus on one small thing you can do or improve, and that'll make you feel a bit better about getting towards the whole. But it's dead natural that we want to just achieve the whole thing, and you think it should be right. Why aren't they doing it? And that's a very hard thing to teach. But that was not. It's not my advice either. But that would be the advice I would give.
I was about to say exactly the same thing, apart from the Prime Minister of Belgium bit. But, yeah. But yeah, we all want to change the world. We know systemic change is really needed in a lot of elements of life. But yeah, don't underestimate the power of doing small things. And also, don't underestimate the power of you being as an individual, but actually helping the individual as well. And actually, if you can change the life of one person, help make their life better, that's an amazing thing to do. And actually, you're instilling those positive actions in that person. You're kind of leading by example within the apartment as well. So actually just helping one person at a time sometimes is one of the best things you can do. So don't underestimate that.
I guess the first thing to say is, you might not be a leader in job title, but you are a leader. We can all be leaders, can't we? And you have to have the confidence that you are leading that position in your organisation. Jodi's right. You know, the difference that you make to the lives of LGBT plus children and young people is astronomical. And the difference you'll make to the lives of their parents and carers will be astronomical. As the parent of a non-binary teenager, I can tell you the difference when we get a nurse, a doctor, a practitioner that uses the right pronouns. Makes a massive difference. When we get a practitioner that is wearing a rainbow lanyard or a pronoun pin, my child is much more likely to engage in that conversation with them. So you're leading in all the things you're doing already, and I think what you'll start to see is other people recognising that change can be really small and you don't think it's happening, and then all of a sudden one day you'll go in and someone else will be wearing a lanyard or someone else will be wearing a pin. You're making a difference.
So what do we all think about queer positive children's nurses trying to make change in an underfunded, uncaring, bureaucratic system? I think that sounds like a Great. Well, we are out of time now, so we're going to wrap up. But we've got plenty of extra time here for a few drinks, some networking. Are we all sticking around? If anybody has any other kind of questions, or you want to easy questions, sort of tips, just any personal information about the Prime Minister of Belgium, then our panel are here for it. We do have some food, I believe, turning up soon as well, to keep us going, courtesy of the fabulous NatWest. So yeah, all that's left for me to do is to say thank you very much for turning up on this chilly, very winter-feeling December evening, and thank you very much to our panel. Could we let them know?